Hi there and welcome to the Delicious Art Adult Beginners class. So today we are painting this little succulent, and I really like the idea of this because there's going to be it's going to be quite repetitive, and once you get the hang of one shape of the petal, then the rest becomes easy. But the whole process is all about thinking about what comes first, what comes last, and the layering. And we'll get to blend some really pretty colours and make something fun, and also with a focus on shadow and texture. So welcome to today. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you share your photo with me when you're finished. So what I'm going to do now is switch my screen over so that you can see what I'm doing on the table, and then we'll get started. The first part of the class is all about doing a charcoal drawing. So we're going to do that first, and then we will do the colour version. So I've just got to stand up and make my iPad do its thing. Press all the right buttons. Eventually. There it is. Lovely. So that will now, as soon as I move over to camera, just got to change my settings. Okay, I'm going to pop that there and set the focus and pop some lights on. Lovely. So that's my, this is my art diary. So for the charcoal section of the class, we do a little black and white study or sketch of our picture. And you'll see on your notes here that you'll have a black and white version as well as a coloured one. So the first part is just about studying the shapes and the picture and getting familiar with where everything is in relation to the grid lines and drawing it up in charcoal. So excuse my messy table. I haven't cleaned it off since last time, which is really naughty. And that's where all the dust lands. So you can tell pastels are very dirty. They make lots and lots of dust. But the reason I have a cloth here is because it kind of catches all the dust, and I can take that off and shake it out later on. So let's get started with some charcoal. First thing we need to do is draw up a thumbnail or a square shape or rectangle shape, whatever shape your picture is, onto the drawing paper. So this is in a landscape format today, so it's wider rather than taller. I'm just going to fix that focus. That's better. Make it stay there. There we go. So yeah, this is a landscape picture, and so what you want to do then is draw something in that same proportions onto your drawing paper. So I like to work nearly to the full size of my page. Some people prefer to do little thumbnails like this. So you can do whatever size you like, but I find with charcoal and pastel, it's actually easier to work big. So, you know, that's always a good option, I find. I find it much easier. So you can see on the colour version here that I've got a grid lined up on there. So the reason for the grid is to help us find where things are in the picture, and I find it extremely useful for drawing. So I'm just trying to see where I put my ruler. I had it this morning and now it's disappeared. I'll have to find that for the next bit. But for now, I'll just draw it in freehand. If you've got a ruler handy, you might want to use that to just rule in some lines. So we're just going to put the grid marks in like this. I've done it all freehand, so it's a little bit haphazard and loose, but that's okay. It's actually nice to work looser at the beginning, and then you're a little bit more relaxed, I find, with what you do. So I've got my grid marks drawn up, and now the process is to just figure out where everything is within this picture. And the easiest way to do that is to just look at each little section. So for instance, this top left segment there, just look at that section on your picture. Ignore everything else. And sometimes it's easy if you just cover it all up with your hand or a bit of paper or something. And then you're only looking at that bit there. And so when I look at that bit, I can see that there's a line comes from the top and down, and it crosses over the line about there as it heads off into the next portion. There's also a little line across the top here. So that's an outside petal. It's the edge of an outside petal. So all I need to mark into that section are those two lines. And then I'm going to move down to the next one. So that's the next one on the left underneath. And notice where the lines go inside that one too. So in this top right corner of this section, so this little segment, I've got a line that comes down, then it's interrupted by another line that comes across here. And you don't have to do this precisely, just draw them in as you see them. You don't have to be exactly right. You just need to, I think it's about measuring with your eye, distance between things. So for instance, this shape here, this little petal, the tip of this petal here, it comes across about a third of the way into this segment, doesn't it? So if halfway is there, you just do this by eye, or you can measure it if that's easier. Halfway is there, so a third's about there, and then it kind of comes down to the bottom of that section there. So that's that little shape there. And then out from that, there's a petal underneath as well. So it comes up and it nearly doesn't quite get to that line. So it arcs up like that and then down again off the page. So can you see how drawing in each of these little parts helps to build the picture? Oh, I forgot one in that top bit there. There's a little petal that comes around the top there and down into that segment there. That's this guy here, right on the very edge. Okay. And so what I do is I just move around the picture and look at each little segment and draw in what I see there. So now I can come down into this one and I can draw the line across the top of the corner of that one. And then I can see there's another shape that comes out and down there. And then there's another shape that comes around like that. So can you see how this is all starting to kind of come together? Then I move down into the bottom left section and I can see it's got a little point there and then it kind of comes across. There's another line that comes around that way and then there's a line that goes that way. So while you're doing all these parts, it kind of doesn't feel like it is anything, you know, they're just all little lines. But it's actually the best way to draw something is to see everything as a shape rather than an item or a thing. Because when we look at stuff like eyes or animals, horses, cats, whatever, we see their shapes and we get used to that. And then when we try to draw it, we have expectations. And sometimes you might think they've got a really big eye, but they actually don't in reality. So if you think that the cat's got a big eye, you're going to draw a really big eye. But if you do your drawing in a grid like this, you can't go wrong because you've got to fit it into a certain section. And so it really helps to get all your sizes and proportions right. So while I've been yabbering on, I jumped ahead and started drawing into this top quarter in the second row across. And so let's just work our way down through that row now. And again, just looking at all your lines and all your shapes. This is actually quite a confusing kind of picture. It can easily become very confusing. And petals and stuff like that do that because it's like a puzzle and you have all these pieces that kind of fit together. But sometimes you can't remember which one you're looking at. And that's happened to me this morning. I was lost in one section and I thought, oops, no, I should have put that down in the next one. And so this is a really great way to find out where things go. So these two segments here where the center of the flower is a little bit more detailed, isn't it? You've got a lot more lines and shapes and things in there. So let's just work our way around it slowly, slowly. And you might have noticed too that most of these shapes are kind of triangular shaped. So each one has 3 corners basically. And so that's a helpful thing to know as well, because it'll help you get your shapes in the right spot. Okay, so as we get into the middle, where those smaller bits are, it gets a little bit harder to get the finer details in, especially if you've got a chunky bit of charcoal. We can do it. Okay, and then we've got the top of that one. So now we've got all the bits and pieces in this little segment, and we can work our way down and carry on into the next part. So they're kind of funny. They're almost like a heart shape, aren't they? But you can't see the top side of the heart. So carry on down through there. So just putting those lines in where you see them. So the tip of this little petal, or the heart of the bottom of the heart, just comes slightly over that next line. And then the shoulder goes slightly over the center line. You can see it starting to come together, and that's exciting, isn't it? You can see something forming with all these strange lines and shapes and things that we're drawing. And so I'm down in the bottom segment now. And so that's now starting to look like something. Okay, so I'm going to come across here, and I may as well stay down at the bottom now and just keep working my way up. So just gently, gently work your way around the picture, noticing where all the tips come to, how far away they are from the different lines. You know, like, is it halfway across that section, or is it a third of the way across? Does it intersect with anything? You know, and you can, it's just such a great way to find out where things are. I'll go back up to this top one now. So I like to kind of follow it around the picture with my other hand, so I know which part I'm up to, because it, as I said before, it's easy to kind of lose your way a little bit. And you know, this one petal on the right here, this big one, feels too big, doesn't it? It feels like, should it really go that big? But yes, it should. The lines don't lie. So each part, sometimes it's unexpectedly bigger than you think, or sometimes it's smaller than you think. It just depends what it is. And then up the top, we've got another one up there. So I said in the notes just to leave, when we do the colour version, if you have a dark piece of paper, you could just leave that paper uncoloured or unfilled with pastel, and just let the dark paper do its thing, basically. If you don't have dark paper and you do want to darken the background off, then you can always just fill in this bit here. This is the part I'm talking about. So you can see in the black and white picture that that's really dark in there. So once you've got that drawn in, and just double check everything's in the right place, make sure your little petals, you know, are sitting where they need to be in relation to the grid line. And you can check that, you know, just by looking at shapes. Everything's a shape, isn't it? And within each one of these petals, you've got grid lines that kind of tell you where the beginning and the end is, and how wide it is, etc. All right, cool. So I feel like I've got nearly everything in there. So next we're just going to do a little quick exercise of shading. And when I say shading, I mean we're just going to do some black charcoal, and we're just going to practice or really study the tones in this picture. And to do that, you can look at the black and white version. So just ignore the colour one for now. We've done the drawing. Everything is where it needs to be. So if you look at your black and white picture, you can see where it's absolutely darkest. So what I'm going to do is just fill in the darkest area with some charcoal. And I've got a chunky stick of charcoal to do this, because I find it's easier just to fill up the larger area with a bigger, fatter stick. So I'm kind of using the side and the end of it to get all my darks in there. Now, as I said, if you're going to be working on dark pastel paper, you won't need to fill up this bit. So over on the side, on the left-hand side there's a dark area there. So that's the background as well. and up on the top there. So just top left is there's another little dark section in there. And then after that, everything else is in tones. And if you look at this, you can see that the middle section of each of those little petals that are around the outside, they're kind of darker inside underneath the other petals. And then as they come out to the edge of each one, they've got a little shine or a bit of light around them. So that's fun, because now we can start to play with some tone and shading. So what I want to do is just darken off underneath the outside petals where they meet, where they go under the other ones. So as they go in towards the middle, they get darker. And then as they fan out towards the edge, they get lighter. So you could press a little bit lighter with your charcoal until you sort of created this gradual blend from dark to light. And if you find you get too much dark on there and you want to lighten it up a little bit more, so see, I've just pulled my finger through that and I've pulled it from the middle where I've got more charcoal towards the outside, but it's kind of all gone a bit same. So now I can darken off again in the center there. So put some more charcoal in there. And then to lighten off the edges, because it's a lighter up around here, I can use my kneadable eraser and that will take some of it out and give me some light. So then I'm starting to get a really nice gradual blend from dark to light. So that's what we want to achieve on each of these little petals or leaves, whatever they're called. So looking at this one on the top left, just do a quick little study of that and you can see it's really dark under there on the underside because it's sitting underneath another one, right? So every one that's under something will have shadow. It'll have shadow underneath the one on top, if that makes sense, because everything casts a shadow. So if something sits on top of something else, like my hand, for instance, you can see there's shadow on this side where my other hand is because it's casting a shadow depending on where your light is, of course. So that's what's happening here. So we're getting cast shadow from the petals or leaves above the one below. And so it's got to be darker inside there and then gets a little bit lighter as it finds the light. So the next one around, so what I'm doing is working from the outside in because the outside petals are furthest away and they're behind everything else. So I'm going to work around that and just fill in the next one. So the next one around doesn't have a lot of tone in there, but more dark in the middle section just here. And then the one under that is lighter again in tone. So tone is your darks to lights. It's whatever's darkest all the way up to the lightest. And of course you can stick your fingers in and smudge it around if you want to blur things off a little bit. Okay. And you'll notice that, for instance, this little one at the top here is dark under where it sits underneath the one on the left of it. And then the one on the left of it has a bit of shine on the edge, doesn't it? Just to highlight it a little bit. So that's how you kind of make everything look like it's in layers, by lightening up the edges and darkening up underneath. So we can work our way around this. We'll just go fairly quickly now and then we can get stuck into the colour version. So as I said, we're going to work from what's underneath to what's on top. So, and you'll notice, you know, as you go around, for instance, this section here, there's shadow being cast by the one above. So it's a little bit darker underneath where the petals are. And then as the colour or tone comes out to the edge, it gets lighter. And we'll do that with colour, with the pastels. So it'll be really nice to do that. And as I said, you can use your eraser if you want to brighten any of that up. So for instance here, on the edge there, I've got a dark line, but in the picture it's not dark at all, it's really bright and light because that's the edge of the petal. I don't know whether these are petals or leaves, but anyway, I'm going to call them petals for now. And see how that just sits on top now because it's got that lovely bright edge. And so it's about looking at the one underneath it again and thinking, okay, if this is that light, that needs to be slightly darker. So you're always thinking about what's lighter and what's darker, and how can I make something look like it's closer to me or more forward or further away. And it's all about how light and dark it is. So I can lighten this edge up again because now I've darkened off the one underneath it a little bit more, and see how that kind of brings it forward again. So we'll be doing a fair bit of that blending stuff with the pastels. Okay, so we'll just run around here again, and again where the petal sits on the top is where the shadow is, and then as it comes out towards the edge it gets a little bit lighter, and then right on the edges we've got that lovely shine. So we'll do that with white when we do the coloured version. And then underneath, behind this petal, is another one, but it's a little bit darker, which means that this one can then stand out more. So if I lighten up the edge of this one around here with my eraser, and then softly blur those edges a little bit, because it's not a real hard line, it's a soft blurred edge. And so now that is standing out on top of this one because underneath here it's darker. And you can actually emphasize that more. If you wanted to darken that off more and create a bit more drama in your art, then you can do that. That's the fun part. You can actually emphasize things and exaggerate things a little bit. It just makes it a bit more interesting. So I'll just do a couple more of these because I'm pretty sure you've probably got the drift now of how this is going to play out. And again, it's quite dark under there, isn't it? And the petals on the top are lighter, so you've got to make the darks dark enough for the light to pop. And so again, and this is the kind of process I suppose we'll be doing. So once we figure out how to do it on one or two petals, then it's reasonably easy just to keep running around the picture and doing the same process on each one as you go, and building up so that then we just come in towards the centre as we go, and it'll all start to pop and come forward, and it'll look 3D because of the shadows and the lights and darks that we use. So it's it's exciting, I reckon, anyway. I just love seeing these things kind of come alive. And just when you're doing the blending with your finger, just press really lightly. You don't have to press very hard. If you do press hard, you'll find it might go kind of a bit muddy looking. And so working from the back to the front. So we're just going to work all the way around to the front, or the top, I should say, of the plant. So you notice some of them don't have as much dark or light on them. Some are more sort of mid-tones, and then others are a bit more dramatic. Lovely, lovely. So I'm just going to put some charcoal on all of them, make it a little darker here and there where I can see shadow. And then especially around the inside there, in between each of the little petals, so the shadows are not as big because these pieces are not as big, but they're quite dark and strong, aren't they? So those dark lines in between all those petals are quite strong, and they're creating a really nice feeling of shadow and dark. So as you play with charcoal more and more, and it's the same with pastel, you kind of get used to how it behaves, and you find different ways to do different marks on your paper. So, you know, you can use the end of your charcoal or your pastel to get a hard line like that. And then you can use the side of it, you know, the soft edge to get the more softer coverage and a more, you know, wider coverage that's not quite so harsh. So basically that's that. And then you can just softly put your finger in there. I kind of dab it around a little bit. I like to pull it, if the shadow's in the middle, for instance, on this one, I like to pull the charcoal out from that section towards the end of the petal. That way when you pull it, because it's dark where you touch it and then you drag it out a little bit on the paper, it gets a little bit lighter as you go. So you start to create that natural tone. And then of course, you can come back in, now we've got charcoal everywhere on all the pieces, you come back in and just notice where it's lightest. So if you look at your black and white picture, you can see there's some spots that are super bright, like really light, little tips of some of the petals, and you can emphasize those and really work on creating them to be, you know, a focal point or a highlight. So the secret is you don't want to have a highlight on everything, because then it's not a highlight anymore, it's just part of the whole thing. So you've got to kind of learn to limit how many highlights you have so that the ones you do have really pop. Oh, I forgot to do that guy there. So I can darken that one off under there, and that will make the top one come forward. So as you do that, as you create the shadows and build it up and put the highlights in, then all the layers will start to make sense and it'll come forward and look like it's solid in 3D. So if you wanted to later on, you could come back to the charcoal drawing and keep playing with that and just building on those tones, because believe it or not, you can spend hours just with charcoal. It's such a nice medium and you can create some beautiful, beautiful things. My new favourite, actually. I'm really enjoying charcoal lately. You can get charcoal pencils as well as these sticks. And so they're really lovely because you can get hard and soft and all the different Bs, 2B, 6B, 4B, etc. And so they're much darker and they get really black. So some charcoal, yeah, you can get super black charcoal pencils. This is willow charcoal, these little sticks, and so they tend not to be as black as the compressed charcoal because it's a natural fibre. And so this is much softer, this charcoal. Yeah, if you wanted some really dark stuff, then you go for the pencils or the compressed, and create an amazing range of tones. Okay, so that's basically all we need to do for now. So now we've had a bit of a practice run, noticed where the light edges and the dark sections are, the shape of this and how it's constructed. So now we can start on the colour version. And as I said, if you want to come back later on and carry on with the charcoal, by all means do, because it's lots of fun. Okay, now what I'm going to do is show you some colours that I've put together for today. So this is my little colour palette and it's based on the colours in the picture. And what I did was I just held the picture over my pastels and picked out the colours I could see in there. So on my iPad screen, it's a little bit, it's not quite as bright as this, but I like the brightness in here. I really love the vibrancy of, see that green in there? It's just delicious. So here are the colours. And while I'm talking about this, you might want to go and grab your colours if you haven't done that already. So this is a blue violet. That's that lovely dark. So we'll be going to be using this in those shadows, and it's got such a nice purple base. It's really, really lovely. So that's my darkest. My next darkest is purple, and so that is going to be a really nice colour for those petals. I can see lots of purple in there. It will also help contribute to the mid to dark tones within those. So that's my purple. Then I've got this green. So I can see that green in there, here and there, particularly probably more around the backgrounds in the bigger petals at the back. So that's this kind of grassy, not really, olive green, I guess, colour. So that's quite nice. So the olive green has a yellow base. So this is essentially a purple and yellow or green combination of colours, which is nice. This green is delicious. So that's the turquoisey green that I can see in there. Now I don't know whether that's because of my printer and what it did when I printed it or what, but I really love that colour. So nice. It's a very hard pastel though. I might have to go find something else that's not quite as hard as that. But if you've got something like that in that lovely greeny turquoise colour, that'll be really nice. And then I picked up a pink because I can see lots of pink in there. Those pink blotches are scattered around in the petals. So I thought that was quite a nice pink. And that'll go really well with the purple too, blending them together. And I've got a lighter green as well. So I'm not sure. I think I might use this kind of in the light sections around the edges of the petals. It's sort of a light, I don't know how to describe that, milky green, I guess. And I think that'll be nice in those light parts. And then, of course, white. White will be the highlights in those white section, the light areas as well. And when we mix those two together, it'll kind of create this lovely milky, lovely soft green colour. So that's the palette that I've chosen for today. And I usually set it in a little box like this so that it's separate from my main palette. So that means that if I don't finish it today, I've still got my colours sitting in there and I don't have to remember what I used. So it's always good to keep your palette separate until you've finished your artwork. Okay, so I'm going to grab a piece of paper now, and then once we've got all that set up, and if you haven't quite got yours ready to go, then we'll have a little break and you'll have some time to get organised. What I've picked today for my paper is a black sheet of paper. Why? I think the lights are going to shine on it, and if I don't want to fill in the background, so this background area in the corners here, I'm just going to leave that black for now. I could go back in later on if I want to and colour it in, but for now I'm just going to leave that undone. So if you have a dark bit of paper, well, that doesn't matter what colour really, you could essentially leave the background unpainted. We'll just focus on the succulent today, and then if you feel like it later on, you can fill the background in. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use my black paper and like to put it onto a little board. So this is well-used tape just to tape down my corners, and that means that the board will sit still, won't move around, and I don't have to hold it down when I'm working on it. So that's nice. So we need new tape on there, but that'll be fine. That'll hold it still enough to do what I want it to do. And the next thing we want to do is rule up your grid marks. So I'll do that now before I take a little break, and then that way while we're on a break, if you haven't got that organised, you'll have time to sort that out. So what I'm going to do is use a white charcoal pencil because it's easier to see on the black. And I'm just going to rule up my halfway line and then my quarter line. So my quarter lines on this are 7.5, then 15 is halfway, and then 22.5 is the other quarter, because this page is 30 centimetres wide. So 7.5, 15, 22.5. And then I can draw those lines in. If you just draw them in lightly so that they're easy to get off if you want to get them off later on. So sometimes if you leave your background unpainted and you've got grid marks on there, you want to get them off. So just press very lightly. This paper is awesome, but it does hang on to every little crumb. and sometimes it's a bit tricky to get it off. So the halfway measurements for the side, so the side's 23, or just under. So I make my halfway mark at 11.5, and then 5 3/4, and then I'll move the ruler and put this halfway one onto 12 so I can figure out what 5 3/4 is. So it's about there. Maths is not my strong point. So 11.5, 5 3/4, move that to 12 and make that 17 3/4. If that makes any sense at all. It's my maths logic brain. So I'm going to draw up the grid line, and then that's going to help us get the flower into the right spot. And we'll do exactly what we did before. We just mark in the lines in each segment until the whole thing's drawn in, and then we'll start working with some colour. So I'm going to give us, a little break, and we'll come back shortly. Okay. So hopefully you've got everything drawn up and ready to go. You've got your reference photo nearby so you can see that, and all your colours organised. Now, just because we've picked out our colours doesn't mean you can't go get more if you need them. So you're not limited to what's in the box, basically. So let's start drawing this up, and maybe you've had time to do that already, but I'm going to quickly draw this up. But I'm not going to spend lots and lots of time on it. We just need to make sure we get everything in the right place. So just starting over in that left-hand column and working our way down from there. So you might find it easier to do each segment at a time, or you might just want to, find the edges of each petal and draw them in as you go. You'll find your own way, so it's the sort of thing that you just kind of work out what's best for you. I find when I'm drawing too, I like to hold my pencil fairly loosely at the end rather than tight like if I hold it tight like this, then my marks have to be very precise and heavy, I find. Could just be me, but if I hold it loose like this and the pencil's not too tight in my hand, then I just feel like I've got a little bit more freedom and my marks are lighter, which is a good thing, because if I need to rub them out or change them, I can do that. So as I said, just running around this quickly, marking in the edges of each of those petals. And when you do it that way, it all kind of works, doesn't it? It's quite amazing, really. And rather than just stopping inside each segment, I might just kind of continue on until I get to the end of the petal that I'm looking at. So that one comes down through there. So the complicated part is in the middle here, isn't it? It's this little section here where all the small pieces kind of gather. And the way to just, figure out where they go is just look at where everything crosses over and where it meets up with the different marks and lines. And sometimes they're bigger than you think. Sometimes they're smaller. But as I said, a light mark is always best, because then you can either go over it with the pastels or take it out if you need to. Okay, so I'm going to do this middle bit here. Comes to there. Too big. So measure, measure, measure. It's amazing how our eye can deceive you. You think something's smaller or larger and it's not. Sometimes it's easier the first time around. No, it's supposed to be the other way around. Yeah. That'll do for now. Okay. Coming down through this section here. Oh, that's much bigger than I thought. So some things go all the way nearly to the edge of the page, don't they? Don't forget the edges of those petals that are on the bottom too, underneath everything. How lovely these shapes. They are a lot like hearts, aren't they? Oh, that one's much taller than I thought. That comes down through the bottom there. Okay, I'm confusing myself here, so I've just got to go back to the basics. This is why the grids are great. You just look at each grid and get each bit in there. Because they all look the same, it's a little bit, you can get lost in the petals and the leaves and the things. Yeah, that's better. And then if you need to remove any lines, just to avoid confusion as you move forward, just take them out with your eraser. This is actually a white charcoal pencil, and I find it's a little bit easier to get off than a pastel pencil, oddly enough, especially if you do light marks. So a white charcoal pencils, they're great, really great. Love them. Didn't know you could get white charcoal. I always thought charcoal was black. Apparently not. Okay, so I think that's most of it in there now. There's a few wonky ones, but we can tidy those up as we go. So the next thing we want to think about is tone, getting the tones and the darks in there. So I've got dark paper, but I still want to get some shadow in there, because when you get the pigment onto the paper, then you can pull it out into the other colours and start to create all these beautiful shadows and things. So I think the best thing to do is just start, we might start with each petal and work our way in towards the centre. So much like we did with the charcoal, we can start on the outside, kind of work around the flower and then come into the next level and the next until we end up in the middle. And each one will be a similar sort of process of putting down the shadows, the mids, the lights, and then blending them all in and then adding more colour over the top. So up in the back corner there, I didn't put that little mark in. See that little petal there? So it's kind of green, isn't it? That one in here. So what I want to do is put down some green. There's also like a drop of water or something on there, but I'm not going to worry about that today. This is my limey khaki kind of green, and that was the green that I could see in those outer leaves. So I can see that in here and down in this one. So it's not so much anywhere else. So we might just focus on these two sections first. Let's do two. We'll do these two. So what I've got is this pastel, and I'm just literally wiping it over the paper. It's not filling it all in completely, and that's okay. I know I can do that with my fingers in a minute when I blend it. The goal at this point is just to get some pigment onto the paper so that when we do blend it in, there's something there to blend. I'm just going to move my colours over to the other side because I'm left-handed, so I want everything within reach. Okay, so now I've got my green on there, and I can see in the picture that there's actually shadow up inside that leaf, so it's sitting underneath the next petal. So if you pick up your blue violet or your darkest pastel and just put a little bit of that down in this section here. So just see in there, and then down in this bottom section as well, so you can see that's got some shadow on the top and the right of that one. So just wipe a little bit of that over the green. And then what we're going to do is blend them together. So as you're blending them, think about how this thing feels. What's the texture of this thing? And I think looking at it, it feels fairly smooth, all these little petal thingies, don't they? They're not bumpy or lumpy or prickly or hairy. They're sort of smooth to touch. So that's the feeling that you want to create, is this smoothness, so that if we did touch it, we'd know what it would feel like. So that's a really interesting thing to think about when you're doing pastels, because you can actually create all kinds of textures depending on how you use the pastel and what movements you make with it. So as I'm doing this, I'm kind of doing these soft, round little movements. And I'm starting in the darkest area where I've got the shadow, right? Because that's where it's darkest. And then I'm kind of doing soft little movements and pulling the dark out in towards the greener side. So it might end up looking a bit muddy and dirty, but that's okay, because we can add more green or whatever we need to put in there to brighten it up or change the colours. Now, I don't mind how that's looking, but I feel like I want to get more pastel on there because it's still looking a bit kind of not as smooth as I'd like. So that's going to need a bit more pastel. So I'm going to add a bit more of my blue violet just under where the dark is again, just up there. And then I'm going to put my green back in again. I'm going to add a bit more green, because what I want to do is get all the pigment to stick to the paper. And this paper is quite gritty. It's like sandpaper. So if you imagine every little bit of sand that's stuck to this has gaps around it. And what we need to do is fill up all the little gaps, which are tiny, teeny, weeny gaps, with pigment or colour, so that eventually you won't be able to see the texture of the paper, and what you're doing will look smooth. So I'm going to just pull this around. And as I'm doing that, I'm keeping my finger on the paper. I'm not lifting it up, because every time you lift it up, you'll add another fingerprint, and you kind of break the flow a little bit. So I'm just very gently keeping my finger on the paper and blending that in, so that I'm trying to create a lovely, smooth kind of feeling or texture. And that's looking better now. It's filling up the tooth nicely, and it's starting to look nice and thick and lush. Lovely. Now, if you want to, you could always add, I can see there's a bit of red in there actually. I might try the pink. I might have to pick up an extra pastel, I don't know yet. Let's see what pink does. So pink or red and green always make lovely muddy sort of colours. This is the pink that's kind of blotched around on the other petals, and it's also on these green sections, but because it's on green, it looks sort of dirtier or muddy. So what I've done is just blotch a few little marks on there like that with my pink, and then I'm just going to dab it in gently with my finger. So I'm not blending it as such, because what I want to do is for those marks to not be pushed in too much. If you blend this too much into the green, it's just going to go all muddy. And if you've already done that, don't stress, you can undo it. All you need to do is add more green and then dab your pinks on again. So just dab them lightly like that. And because these are on the leaves or the petals at the back, we don't really want them to kind of be too bright. So when I don't want something to be too bright, I just dab it with my finger. Lift and dab. So lift, dab, 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 like that. And what that does is it softens off the colour and it pushes it in, and it just blurs it a little bit without blending it all in and making more mud. So different techniques for different things. Now I can see the edge of this one. I just want to try this and see what happens. This is that light green colour that I picked up to put some highlights in. See on the very edge of this one down here, it's got a little shine right on the edge of the leaf. And there's a little bit up on the top of this one as well. I've just drawn a very fine line with the edge of my pastel. So rather than plonking it down on the paper and running it around, getting a big wide mark, you can tilt it up and use it a bit like a pencil and just find the edge and draw a line with it. Again, I don't want that to be too bright. So what I'm doing now is I'm putting the pad of my finger onto the edge where the light mark is and just softly, softly pulling it in towards the middle of the lid, so that it's still bright, but it's kind of blurred off a little bit, softened off. Same up the top. So that the process for that is dabbing your finger again, but as you push down with your finger on the edge, just pull it in a little bit towards the middle of the leaf so that you're softening off those edges, but you've still got that highlight sitting there. So that's those two bottom ones, and I think that's pretty all right. I can see the shadows coming out from under here. It's getting a little bit lighter green as it comes more into the light. And then we've got our edge highlighted and a few little pink splotches on there. Those pink splotches will tie in with the rest of the plant. Okay, cool. So the next furthest away part of this, so we're looking at it in layers. We're doing the furthermost back layer first. So these guys over here on the right-hand side, and that one under there, and that one under there, they're all in the back. So we need to do those next. I'm just looking, so this one, this petal here, top left, that's sitting on top of this one, isn't it? So we could do that one, that one, that one, and then that one under there first, and then we'll build up from there. So what we need to do is this top right one, which is kind of lighter. I'm going to do it in my purple colour. I feel like it needs to be lighter than that though. Maybe, no, I'm going to do it in this green and purple, see what happens. So sometimes, most times, you don't have the colours you want in your palette. Oftentimes you don't have exactly the right colour. And so you've got to make it, and making it is heaps of fun. I love that bit, because that way you get to create your own colours and have a bit of a play. So I've just put that light green on there. And if you don't have that light green colour, maybe something like a pale grey, actually, should have got a grey, would work really nicely. Because this is kind of got greys and purples in it. So a grey would be fine as long as it's the same kind of tone. So you don't want it really dark. See, compared to that green in the shadow from the underleaf we just did, this is not dark. It's quite light actually. So you want a mid to light grey or something of that tone. Okay. And then I've popped a bit of purple on there because I feel like I can make that colour quite easily with a bit of purple and that pale green. Let's see. Sometimes you don't know until you try it. It's not exactly right, but I think it's pretty close. So that's technically a grey, isn't it? So if you've only got a grey, then use that. If you've got a lilac or something, then that might be nice too. Remember too, when you put these down, to kind of overlap where the other petals are going to sit in front, because what you want to do is have a continuous background behind there. So you don't want to have a gap between the one at the back and the next one in front. I put a bit, I can see there's a little bit of a shadow just on the right side of that one there. And so I can try some purple with that. It's not quite dark enough. I might try a bit of this green actually. So don't be afraid to try other colours. You know, you think, well, that's a shadow, it has to be dark or purple. Not necessarily, because mixing colours together will make lovely muddy greys and greens and things. So sometimes, you know, putting a different colour in there that you might not expect can work really well. So still not dark enough. I'm going to have to add a little bit of this blue violet. So that's that lovely dark one. I'm just going to dot some of that on because it's a really strong colour and I don't want it to be too much in this bit. There we go. So see, I've just blended that in. And again, when I'm blending, I just keep my finger on the paper and let it do its thing and pull it across like that. Lovely. Yeah, I can see a bit of pink in here too. There's a bit of pink in everything, so we can smush a bit of that in there. Just a little bit, just gently, gently wiping it over and then very lightly running my finger across it. So don't blend too much because it'll push it in and turn it to mud. I think that'll do. And then on the very edge of that one, there's light, isn't there? Now I don't want to make that too light just yet, so I'm going to use this pale green. And you might want to use your grey if that's what you started with for this part, just to get some highlights on that edge there. See how that just glows nicely now? A little shine. So I can tell that the light is coming from the right-hand side on this particular plant. Now, how do I know that? Because all the light bits are on the right, mostly, except for the bumpy bits that might be sticking up and catching some of the light. But you can see, especially if you look at the black and white picture, all the lights on the right, on the edges of the right of each of those. And then the petals or leaves on the left-hand side don't have as much light on them. We've got little bits, but not around the edges like these ones on this side do. So it's always good to know what direction your light's coming from. So I'm going to leave that one as it is for now. And so they're the colours I use. I'm going to kind of keep them out so I can remember what I did to make that, because now I've got to run around here and make some more. So there's another one, just the edge of it, just sitting there. You see that guy there? And he's got another petal sitting on top of him. And then we've got this one that comes out over here off the page, or, yeah, off the page and then back on again. So we've got two of these background petals sitting there, and then there's one just down in here too. Now it's a bit darker, so we can darken that one off a bit more. But they're all sort of similar colours, these ones, because they're on the same layer, basically. So I've got my light green down there, and I'm going to pop some purple in, just like I did for the one before this, because I want it to have the same kind of muddy grey colour. So if you smush a bit of colour on there, and then I can blend it all in and get it to stick to the paper. And again, just keeping your finger on the page so you're not lifting up and down all the time. Make sure you go down and overlap those petals that are going to sit on top so you don't get any gaps between them. And rub that around. You might find you have sore fingers after this. It can actually make your fingers really sore if you do a lot of blending on this kind of paper. But it's art and it's all worth it. Just pushing all of those in, creating that lovely grey colour. And if you haven't got those colours, just use your grey. Okay, nice. And then I'm going to pick up this green, so this muddy green colour. I'm going to pop a bit of that in here too, because I just want to soften that off and make it a little bit muddier, a bit dirtier looking. And pop a bit in this one too. So this is when you kind of look at your picture and think, okay, where is that darker? Just look at each little petal or section and notice that, you know, some sides are lighter, so there might be a bump in it, it might have a little crease or something like that. And so often, you know, if it's a crease, then where it's down inside the thing, it'll be a bit darker. And if it's popping up, catching the light, then it'll be lighter, of course. Okay, so smush some of that in. Now, while I'm down in this bottom one, I'm going to put a bit of dark in there. I can see that's quite dark under there. You can hardly see that one. It's not very obvious, but it does create background for the rest of it. So if I darken that off with my blue violet, smush it in, it kind of sends it back. And then thinking about, you know, the next one on top of that, this one here, will have a lovely bit of shine around the edges so it will stand out on top of this darker background. So thinking like that all the time, I'm going to think about how's this going to work with that. If I make it dark, will it be too dark against the next part, etc. You can just see there's a little tiny bit of a light just on the edge of that one down in here. So I'm just using my pale green. If you've got a grey, then use that. And there's also light on this other one over here, the one that goes off the edge of the page. So it's got light around the edges as well. So you can tell that these petals are sort of like a solid, thick object because of the amount of light that's catching around the edges of them. If that makes sense. Okay. Cool. So that's created a really nice little blend there. If you feel like it's maybe too green, I can add a bit more purple and grey it off a bit more. So you can add more layers. You don't have to just stop at 1 or 2 layers. You can keep going for quite a few layers. And then depending on which pastel you're using and what kind of paper you're using as well, will depend on how many layers you can get on there. With these Art Spectrum pastels on colour fix paper, they can usually get about 5 or 6 layers before it won't let me put more on. And then if you get to that point and you still want to add more, you can use a spray fixative to fix whatever's already on there. So for instance, I could spray all this and then I'd be able to add more pastel over the top. Fixatives are really good if you just want to seal things and make sure they don't move or smudge. So my edges are looking a little blurry because I'm on a dark paper and I'm trying not to get too much of that, my light colour off the edges there. You'll find with pastels it's pretty tricky getting sharp edges. Not impossible, it takes a bit of work, but yeah, usually pastels are very kind of loose and chunky. Okay. So that's the outside ones done. Now, when you look at this, you can see that the first green ones we did are slightly darker than those, aren't they? And then these guys over this side are quite light. In fact, I'm thinking I need to lighten that outside one up even more because that's where the light's coming from. This is my white. Now, I'm not going to leave it white. I just want to put it on there so I can make that a little bit lighter in colour, and then I can smoosh it around with my finger and get that lovely tone on after. There we go. That's good. Yes, that's better. So I can see where that's now catching the light. It's not exactly the same colour as what I've got on the picture, but that's the nice thing about being an artist. You can create your own colours. Still want that to be a bit bluer, to be honest. A bit more purple, maybe. But don't be afraid to try different things. It's fun. It's fun. I love mixing colours on the paper. And then just to tie it in with our little pink blodges, we might just pop a couple of those in here and there. I know they're not exactly in the right or the same place, but they're near enough. You can see a couple of pinks down in that bottom one as well. And just lightly push those in, just so it's all consistent, ties together. Okay, next one. So the next layer of petals, let's do this guy down the bottom here. So that one's got a bit more pink in it, hasn't it? Let me see. Yeah, so I'm going to start with purple, even though I said pink. And I'm going to put some purple in here. And then I'll add my grey or my green and make it into that lovely grey colour. So it's got to be sort of consistent with what I've already created, even though this one's got a bit more shadow inside here. So just up in there is darker because it's sitting underneath those other petals. So I've got 3 colours on there now. I've got my blue violet for its shadow, and some purple, and then that light green or grey colour. and pushing all of that around. And there's a nice, you know, bright edge on this one as well, on the right of it. I'm going to get this base coat down first. So think in layers when you're working in pastels. You know, you don't do just one thing and leave it unless it's perfect right from the beginning. And then you can, of course, but you can build it up. So make sure you've got that shadow area nice and dark under there, because then when we put the next layer of petals on the top, they're going to pop because they're lighter. So make that lovely and dark, deep in there. Underneath, that's it. And then it's got quite a lot of pink on this one, so I'm going to rub my pink. I'm just rubbing the side of the pastels on here. When you do it on the side like this, you get a much wider, looser sort of mark, so there's no hard lines. It's just kind of soft. And then just gently push that in. So as you build up your layers, you want to push less and less hard. And that way you don't make so much mud, and then the colours kind of sit on top and they shine a bit more. So it's looking very purpley pinky, but I don't mind that, it's quite nice. Might add a bit more. I feel like I want to go and get some blue. Do I? I'll have a think. I'm going to pop a bit more light green, oil grey, just in this bit here. You see that's a bit lighter in that section, so that obviously is catching the light there. Or it might be a different colour in that part. And then on the edge too, I'm just going to use my green, my light green, to put a little bit of light on the edge in there. And push that through. So again, get the pad of your finger and just put it down on the edge and then drag it in so that it sort of blows off a little bit, softens off that edge. And then I can add some more pink. There's a lot of pink in here. Nice. Okay. Maybe we don't need blue after all. If you feel like you want blue, or if there's a colour you want to add on, then by all means grab it. Don't let me stop you. Oh, remember this green that I talked about before? There's a lot more of that on the petals on the inside, but I'm going to pop a bit of that in here. Do you know why? Because this green with the purple just makes the most delicious greys. Oh, yum. So that's a turquoise kind of green, and I'm just going to let it sit on the surface and not push it in. And that way it'll still retain its brightness. And by kind of pulling it around, it's picking up the other colours underneath and making its own sort of tone. Beautiful, beautiful shadows. Nice. So that'll do for that one. Okay, let's move around to what's next. So we're in this bit now, aren't we? Yep. So we'll go over here onto the left-hand side, and it's the same sort of process with that one. Same colours. So as we move in towards the middle of the flower, we're getting the same kind of tones and colours going on. So let's just start with that again. So what did we do? Did the pale green or grey. Put one layer of that down. Just like that, nice and loose. And then some purple. Because what I want to do is make a grey. Lovely. And then a bit of my blue violet where the shadow is. So remember the shadow on this one is on the right because it's underneath all the other ones. Okay. And then kind of just blend that in. And make it nice and smooth. So remember you can add more dark to make more shadows, and you can add more light to lighten it up. Just pushing that in like that. can darken this off again in here, and thinking again about the petal that's going to sit on top of it and how we want that to be lighter. So to make things brighter, you need something darker next to it or below it or around it. Just really noticing where those shadows are. There we go. That's good. And then I really love this green, and I can see a bit of that smooshing around in there, so I'm going to put a bit of that in there. Lovely, lovely. And a bit of pink. It's like making a cake, isn't it? You put all the bits and bobs in there and stir. Beautiful. And the lovely thing with pastels is, you know, you can do this kind of work and just let all that colour sit on the surface like that. It looks gorgeous. So nice. And then I can see just over here on the bottom left side, it's a little bit lighter just in there, isn't it? So if I come back in with my lighter green, the one I started with, or your grey, whatever you've got, and just run that around there and let that sit there. If you don't want to let it sit, just kind of gently, just dab it in lightly. You don't want to blend it too much because it'll go muddy. And now I've lost some of my shadows, so I'm going to put some more dark in there. So I'm going to keep checking these things. Shadow, light, shadow, light. There we go. It's quite a dramatic shadow on this petal. So if you look at it, you can see on the right-hand side, it's much darker as it goes in underneath there. And then as it comes out, it gets lighter. So around this top section here, it's catching the light just on the edge there too. So I can put some of my light green on there and dab that in, just pull it in gently from the edges so that you soften off the side bit. Nice. I'll put a bit more of this delicious green in there. Lovely, lovely. So that's that one done. So can you see now how the process is kind of working? And it's just a little formula that you apply to each one. But of course, each petal's slightly different. The lights and the darks are in different places, and you've just got to kind of figure out where they are. Oh, we forgot this back one up here. Well, I did. You probably remembered, but I didn't. Let's fill that one in too. So again, now see, as I'm putting this in, I'm thinking, oops, I need more shadow on that first one we did way back when. See, under here, it's got to be darker in there, doesn't it? Now that I'm looking at it, you look at the picture and look in there, it's got to be much darker. So I'm going to darken that off before I do anything else and pull that out a little bit so we get that gradual blend. So the nice thing about pastels is they don't dry, or you don't have to wait for them to dry. There's no waiting time. So if we had done this, say, in acrylics or watercolour or something, well, you could with watercolour, but with acrylics you can't get back in there and muck around with what's already there if it's already dry. But with pastels you can sort of, you know, do it any time. I can leave this sitting around for a year and then pick it up and keep going, and it doesn't dry out or go off or anything. So it's lovely to have that immediacy, you know, be able to just pick it up whenever you feel like it. It suits my personality nicely. If I had to plan ahead, and you know, you've got to do oils or acrylics, you've got to get your water out and your brushes and your palette, and you've got to finish it before it dries or wait for it to dry for 6 weeks or whatever it is. And that's just, yeah, way too annoying for me. Everybody's different. So I'm just doing this little back one at the moment that I should have done earlier because it's on the outside. Smushing that around with some of the grey and the green and the purple. And you can see on the on this left side of it, it's got this little shadow because it's a solid kind of chunky leaf, and so there's shadow on that side. It's telling you that this is a thick thing, it's a solid object, and there's shadow there, and then as it comes around into the top side of the petal, it's lighter. So all those things tell us things about the shape of an item or whatever it is you're doing. So you've got to kind of think about that stuff and figure out how you can convey, you know, the feeling or the pressure or the texture of some of things. So that's that little fella. Now there's also a bit of dark up in here, up in the middle of it. It looks like it's got a little dip down and then it pops up again. I've put my light green on the right side where the sun or light's shining. I'll put a bit of shadow through there. And now see how that looks like it kind of, it's raised up at the sides, it dips down in the middle and then it raises up again. So it's got this lovely feeling of texture in there. And that's all because of the light and the dark and where we've placed it. The frustrating thing is you get that right on one and then you think, oh no, I need to get that happening on all of these. So you kind of keep going back and trying to make them all have the same feeling. So, but you can, and that's the good thing. You can actually jump in and change things as you go. So that's that guy. Now let's move around. We'll do this next one here, this one. So again, I'm just going to mark out the shape of that one, and it bleeds off the page as well. And then it comes down, and because I can still see some of my grid line, it makes it a bit easier to figure out where it's got to be. So that's that one there. So same thing again, same sort of process. If you look at the colours though, there's a lot more purple and pink in this one. It's not quite as grey, so they're getting brighter, or the colours are getting more intense as we come to the top. I'm going to add some of my pinks in here. When I blend all this, it'll go muddy, but then I can add more again. Yes, I can see blue. I still see blue in there. I might have to go and get a blue in a minute. I'll push this in and see what happens. Okay, so that's filling up nicely. And as I said earlier, depending on what kind of pastels you use will depend on how much you can get down. So if you're using a very creamy pastel, for instance, the Schminky, they're beautiful and creamy, but they do fill up the tooth much faster, and you can't blend as much with those. They are lovely for the final layer when you just want something to sit on the surface. Okay, so we've got all my pinks and purples going on in there. And is there some shadow in this guy? Yeah, there is. It's got a crease sort of down the middle, hasn't it? And so it feels like the right-hand side of this one kind of tilts up a little bit. And so that's now in shadow because the light is on the right, and if it's tilting up, then it's putting a little shadow down inside the middle there. So all that takes is just a little bit of dark blue violet or something like that, where you can see those shadows or those creases. And that's given it a little fold. And then I can come back with my light green or your light grey, whatever you're using, and just touch up the edge of that, because I can see there's a bit of shine on the edge. There's a bit of light just in there. Because this is tilting up now, this side here is catching the light. And then we've got a light edge down this side because the light's over there. So what I'm going to do, I've put that down for my light. Now, I haven't used much white. I've put white in one of the petals at the beginning because I wanted to lighten it up. But I like to save my white for last. So you've probably heard me say that before. And what that means for me anyway is that if I get to the end of this and I think, oh, I really want some more brights in there, I wish, you know, I would love to get a bit more light in there on the edge or something, or highlight something. And I'll show you, this is white. I'll show you what I mean. So I could just pick up my white at the end. You'll see how much brighter white is than that green. And it really does glow, doesn't it? It gives it such a nice little shine. But if I do that all the way through and put it everywhere, then it becomes kind of diluted and it doesn't shine as much as I want it to. So I like to save the white for the end and then just pop that on a couple of spots where I can get a really nice little highlight and let that glow. That's really glowing, isn't it? It's nice. You can use white though, for instance, like this. So if I wanted to lighten up this little edge here, just that side a little bit, I can pop a bit of white on there, and it doesn't look bright white because it's sort of soft and it's picking up the other colours underneath. And if I just dab it in gently, then it's not shiny bright white, it's just made everything a bit lighter. So that's nice. Yes, yes. Do I need a bit more dark in there? I've got to go get blue. I can't help it. Back in a minute. I'm going to get a ultramarine blue. Because I think that's just going to help to give it a little bit more colour. And I have to put some more pink in here too. Oh yeah, there we are. Nice. That's nice. Now I want to put it everywhere. Put some over here. This is what happens, you see. You pick up a colour and think, ah, that's what we needed. And then you've got to kind of pop it in other places. That's okay. You can. Like I said, you can do that with pastels. It's immediate. There's no waiting. And it's easy to undo too if you want to undo stuff. So let's pop some pink in here now. Get a bit more colour in there, brighten that up. And I've got to get that beautiful turquoise as well into this. So again, just checking that petal, seeing where it's pink, where it's green and so forth, and just lightly dabbing those colours on. And as you build it up like this, you just don't blend it. Because if I blend it, it loses all its brightness. And then I'm going to pick up this beautiful green. So I can see some of that. It's kind of glowing through here. Almost fluorescent, phosphorescent, glow in the dark kind of green, isn't it? It's a bit too blue now. I feel like I need a different green. Anyway, that'll do for now. I'll try a bit of this with it. Yeah. So this is the green I used on those outside leaves. And I've just popped a little bit over that turquoise. And it just kind of gives it a nice little glow. It also ties it in with the leaves underneath now. So it's all sort of looks like it belongs together. So just a smudge of that. It's amazing what difference that makes actually. Cool. So that's that one. And I could add a bit more pink or red or something in there, but I'll keep moving around. You can always come back and touch stuff up, you know, and change it if you want to. The secret is though to work from back to front so that, you know, if I didn't do that, I needed to get in and do all these back leaves at the end, it's a little bit harder. So I find it much easier to work from background to foreground. That's just me. Okay, so we've got that one done. Now we need to move around to this one because that one's on top of this one. It's complicated, isn't it? I'm going to work all this out. Okay, so this one here is our next one. So again, we can just draw in the shape, fill it in with your grey or whatever you're using, lightish grey tone. And what else did I have in there? Purple. Purple. Each of these is slightly different. It's so interesting. And it's such a lovely combination of colours, I think. You can really have a bit of fun with them. Pink, purple. And then shadow. So there's a bit of shadow here. Not much, a little bit. This one's got quite a lot of light on it, on the edges. So again, let's just push that in, make it nice and smooth. And then we can put more over the top to give it some contours and shapes. So just rubbing that all in. It's a lovely full one, this one. They almost look like stones with the colours on there, don't they? This interesting kind of texture. There we go. So now I can add a little bit more. Where'd my blue go? There it is. A bit of blue in there. So even though they're all slightly different in shape and colour combination, they still have repeated colours in there. So it's good to sort of just keep making sure that you use the similar or same colours as you go around. And noticing the darks and the lights. So I've just put some blue in there and some blue violet where my shadow is. I'm going to add pink yet. Smushing it around, so to get that feeling of almost funny little grainy colours, I'm just doing little wiggly movements with my finger, and I'm not actually picking it up off the page. So I find that's the best way to get a continuous sort of coverage. If you keep your finger down on the page and just swiggle it around, squiggle it around. Okay, so it's not there yet. You can, and I'm just pressing a bit harder now actually because I want to push this colour in and sort of make it a little bit more continuous, like that. And then this lovely green, you see a bit of that kind of greeny brown colour through there. And some pink. I'm just going to run my finger around in there. Lightly, lightly now. So as we build up, we go lighter. Don't push too hard. I'm going to put some light on the edge in a sec. And that'll give it that lovely round feeling. Lovely. And so this is my light green. As I said, I'm going to save my white for last. I can actually put white on here afterwards if I want to make it lighter. It has got a lovely glow, this one, hasn't it? All the way around the edge. So if we use the green, and what I'm doing is I'm not making a hard line. I'm lying the pastel down, but I'm tilting it. So I've still got the edge of the pastel drawing the line, but because it's tilted, it's sort of smudging the edges a bit, so it's not a hard, really hard line. And that's what I want. I want to make it kind of soft so that now I can get my finger, pad of my finger, and put it on the edge and then pull it in so that it creates that lovely gradual blend to give me the feeling of that light on the edge there. Like that. I think it needs a bit more light. It's kind of lighter. It's got more thickness and light around here. There we go. So that's given it a nice feeling of thickness or solidity. That's a good word, solidity. And as I said, I'll do it now. I can add some white. So just and the same thing with the white. I'm not making a hard line. I just want a soft line just on that edge there where it's nice and bright. And maybe even a point. See how that just highlights that a little bit, and then I can just pull it in again. The pad of my finger on the edge and just pull it in gently. Don't press down too hard because it just kind of loses its brightness when you do that. Cool. So that's that one. It's almost glow in the dark. I love what all these colours are doing together. Nice. So smush a bit more pink around. So you can let pastel like this sit on the surface and just be really vibrant. Don't forget, if you get a lot of dust on your page, just to tip it off. So you need to have a little towel nearby that you can pick up your board like this and just go over there where my towel is and bang it. And then that should get all the dust to drop off your page, because there's a lot of dust that tends to kind of just sit there and not go away. Okay, so we're getting there, this is good. Now the next one we need to fill in, so we're up to the next layer now, so that's this one, and this one, I think. Anyway, let's go to this one. I should have done this one before that one because that one sits in front of this one. Doesn't matter. Okay, cool. So let's fill in this one. And it comes down over there. So that's the casting the shadow on the one we've just done. And then it comes around like that and down behind that guy. So that's where that one sits. This one's actually quite pink, I think. So that's that one. I'm just checking to see what's where. And this one comes out. I'm just going to mark them in so I've got a map. Sometimes you've got to sort of map things out for yourself so you know where to go next. That's that on there. So we'll do him. And then that one will be after that. And that goes in through there. Okay, so it's all coming together. Interesting, isn't it? All the layers. There we go. All right, so let's pop some pinks and things on this guy, because this is kind of next in the order of layers. Some pink on there. And a bit of purple. This is how I cook. I just put things in and see what happens. Sometimes it's a disaster. Okay, and blue, some blue in there. And then I'm going to push all this in so it'll make a lovely grey kind of base. So it's a formula, isn't it? It's just a little process, and once you kind of get it right on the first couple, then it just becomes easy with the way you blend the colours. And then give each little petal or leaf its own shadows and lights and things. So that's that one on its way. Nice, nice. You can see all the dust sitting there, kind of not going anywhere. Sometimes it just doesn't want to get pushed in. Okay, and then I'm going to add more pink to this one because he's got lots of pink. If you feel like your pink isn't pink enough, maybe try red, or something else. So sometimes you don't have exactly the right colours, and you just got to make do with what you have, or try to make them. There, that's nice. Put some of this lovely green in there. This turquoise green is beautiful. lightly run that around. So I'm just lightly running that my finger over it. So don't press too hard. So I want those colours to sort of stay there on the surface and shine. There we go. Yeah, good. Now, where is there any shadow on this one? So there's a little bit of shadow. Can you see how it's around about there? So it's almost like it's dipping down slightly into this section here where it's a little bit darker. So that's telling me the shape and the texture. So if I put a bit of blue violet in there and just gently rub that in, I don't want to make it too muddy. See how that's created a little dip there now? You can see there's a light section here and then a dark bit there. And it's almost like it dips down inside itself because the light's catching the edge. So if I pop a bit more of my light green or my whatever you've used for your light, not white yet, so through there. And then there's a bit more under here as well. And then gently just blur the edges of those off. So we've got a nice light edge there. Yeah. And we've got a little bit of, I'm going to make this a little bit lighter just in here to emphasise that dip with white. And then gently push that in, tiny bit. I think I lost my dip a bit, but anyway. To darken that off slightly more. So when you're using your blue violet for your darks, just go gently if you don't want it to be too much. It's very strong. There we go. And I think we need some more blue. Nope. And then as you build up your layers, just press lighter and lighter and just lightly run your finger around to get that lovely texture going on. Nice. Nice. Okay, so that's that one. Then we can come down into these guys. So which one's behind? This one's behind that one. So we'll do this first. Bottom, middle. So I've got my green down there. I'm going to pop a bit of purple on. So I'm going to grey that off a bit. And we've got some nice shadow on this one too. So it's kind of dipping down again in the middle. So we've got a lovely dark area at the top of it, and then it's got a nice bright shiny edge on the right side at the point. So that's lovely. And then I get my blue violet go. Oh, it's hiding just under here. That in there, so that'll create a really nice shadow through there. Ooh, that's coming nicely, isn't it? And then we'll put this delicious green in here. Yum, yum, yum. This green is so nice with your reds and pinks. Oh, just yummy. Sorry, I'm carrying on a bit. It's like a pork chop. Okay, and push that in gently. And now that green with the blue violet shadow colour is just lovely and rich and gorgeous. Pop a bit of pink in here, so I've got some pink around there. And across here. coming together nicely. I'm going to probably go to the 2.5 hours today, I think. So we might take a 5-minute break if that's okay with you. That way, if you're feeling a bit behind, you'll have time to catch up. I'm just going to go and grab a water and give my voice a rest for a sec. And then we'll come back and we'll finish this off. Okay, cool. All right. After I do this. Okay, I'll see you in 5 minutes. Okay, so we're back and we'll keep on going. So it's a nice process. Yes, I'm enjoying this one. And now I've walked away. It's always good to walk away, isn't it? Because you come back and you see things that you didn't see before. I feel like I need to add some more dark into some of these because that'll make the lights pop a bit more. So sometimes when you use things like black, it's kind of a bit of a dead colour, and it's good for really dark darks, but sometimes it kind of deadens things too much, and that's why I really like the blue violet or the red violet dark, because you can get some really nice tones with them and it doesn't kind of lose its vibrancy. You still get to, have a lot of beautiful vibrancy in the colours. So, if you are putting dark into things, try to use other things other than black, because black can be a bit kind of deadening sometimes. Anyway, just saying. So I wanted to put a bit more dark into those bits and pieces, and of course some of this gorgeous green, a bit more of that too. Can't get enough of that. And on this one I can actually see that's really quite bright on that side, isn't it? They've all got this beautiful glow. I'm using white to put my shine on there. And then make sure you just clean your finger off a little bit, because you don't want to be putting dark colours into your lights if you want them to stay nice and bright. So that's put a lovely little shine on there. And I've just smudged it off a little bit into the edge. There we go. Just like that. That's pretty. Okay, so we might move around to this one here. Do the same sort of process. So be really good at this by the end. And again, noticing where it's light and dark and where the shadows are. Don't forget to overlap where the next one's going to sit out on top, because we don't want to have any gaps. Try and keep those nice and tight and close together, so we get the feeling that they're all layered. Pushing that one around, and then you can add some. So that's got a fair bit of shadow under it as well. So they're all getting quite strong shadows now as we move in closer. I'm just smushing that around. Lots of lovely pinks. So some of them have, bigger blobs of pink here and there, which I haven't done actually. So I'm going to go back and do that in a couple of spots. That just makes it a bit more interesting, doesn't it? It gives each one its own little personality. Also makes it a bit more interesting to paint. They get a bit boring if they're all the same. Now I can put my blue violet around in there for the dark shadow. Lightly pull that out like that. And again, this one has a lovely shine on the right side. So you can tell where the light's coming from, can't you? Where the light is. Pulling that through there like that. And then a bit of white just on this corner, this little shoulder. Knowing that where the light comes from means that you then understand, you know, the which side's the absolute brightest. And then as things kind of go away from the light, they still hold light, but they're not quite as bright. So in this one, for instance, it's still light around those edges there, but the lightest or brightest bit is just there on that shoulder. So that then you can emphasize that with your white and keep it nice and like minimize the white is what I'm trying to say, so that you don't overdo it. My edge has gone all blurry over there. I need to sharpen that up a bit. And again, because this is sitting on top of the dark one underneath, then I can use this light green one to bring it forward and lighten it up. So it's, as long as it's lighter than the one underneath, then it's going to come forward. Put a few more pink blobs on there because I smushed them in. And that's that one. So we'll just work our way around now. So the next one we need to do is this one and then that one. So this one here, and that comes out around through there. And over that one. And as you're working towards the centre, we're getting smaller and smaller. And we'll probably end up covering up half the drawing, so then we've got to remember where all the bits were. So that's that one, and then we've got this one over here, which comes out to about there. And that one comes, I'm just redrawing it in. So sometimes you've got to redraw your things in so you don't lose them. They tend to get lost pretty easily with pastels because you kind of smudge things and go over them and then forget where other bits and bobs are supposed to be. So that's that one in there, just making sure I don't lose that one. That's that one. There we go. Okay, so we can put these ones in, and again, they seem to be getting a little bit stronger in contrast as they get into the centre. So this one on the right has a nice little dip down into the middle, doesn't it? So we've got some nice strong shadows in there. This one on this side just has a bit of shadow in on the right side, but it's not quite as wide as the other one. So push all that in and put some purple in as well. Same kind of process as the others. And I'm just pushing that in with my finger, so just kind of, again, keeping it on the paper and running it around inside each one to keep that continuous blend going on. Good. And then some of this delicious green in there because I can see a lovely little glow. So as we get in towards the centre, we've got this green sort of glowing a bit more too, which is nice. Same on that side. Oops. My tape's not sticking so well anymore. I'll put a bit of this green in there too because it kind of just gives it a bit of a shine. I'm kind of working on two at the same time now as we're getting smaller and smaller. Harder to work small when you're using pastels, I find. It's much easier to work big, do big paintings rather than little ones because they're so chunky. Okay, so put some pinks in here. And some on this side. So this side's got more light on the edge there. Just got to tip off some of that dust. And then gently dabbing in some of the colour. And as I'm doing this, I'm noticing the petals underneath these guys. Again, they need more shadow. It's funny, isn't it? You think you've made it dark enough, and then when you start looking at it again, you think, oh no, it's not dark enough at all. It needs to be darker. I'll put some blue in here too. And in here, in this dark section. Sometimes pastels scratch the paper, so I think that blue I've got is really quite hard and it's left little scratches on there. It's making lovely shadows. I'll darken this off a little bit more again. The green and the blue violet are just so nice together. Now I'm going to go back under here and make that darker. So sometimes you've got to get back in under things to make some changes. Better. Okay, now this one has some light here. So I'm going to use my light green to brighten up just that top edge there. So that's popping up and catching the light. There's a little bit of light on that edge there, and there's a bit there as well. So on those shoulders, I'm going to call them shoulders. And I'm just dabbing that in lightly, so I don't want to blend it too much. I just want to dab it in so it's sitting on the surface but sticking. And then on the other side, we've got all this beautiful light all the way around. So I'm going to put that in with my green first, and then I'll highlight a couple of spots with the white. Okay, dab that in softly. So again, pulling it from the edge with the pad of your finger in towards the centre. Like that, and then I can pop a bit of my white just on here where I think that's the lightest area right there. Soften that up a tiny little bit. You can always add more if you need to. Yeah. Cool. brighten up that tip just there. There we go. Oh, it's a process. Now, I'm going to get this guy done. So that one comes in here. So they're getting smaller and smaller, and you'll notice it'll be a bit harder to work on the smaller bits, especially when we get into the centre. If you have any blenders, then they'll come in handy for those bits. So again, I've got to pop, I didn't put any pinks on there. Go back in that one for a second, just pop some pink in there. A little bit of pink in here. Blue. Some turquoise. It's like a little formula. You'll always end up with one favourite though. There's always one petal or leaf or something that looks amazing. And then you try to get it the same on the others and it just won't. Lighten up that side. Soften off the edges a little bit. And then a shadow under here. So as we move in, the shadows are getting a bit darker but smaller. Just noticing where the little grooves and dips and things are. Cool. And then where's the next one? Probably this one up here. Fill that one in. And then there's another one here. Okay, so we'll do those two and then we'll have to work in towards the centre. Same thing, just blend your colour in gently, gently. Okay, and some shadow in there. A little shadow just there. And some blue. I feel like a broken record. Shadow under there. A little pink. Softly blend them in. And then we've got to find the light side on those guys too. So this one has light down there, off on the tip, and then over on the other side. A little bit of light, not quite as much on the left. Dabbing that in gently, gently. Then light just in there. And around the edge of this guy. And then we need more shadow under here. So, even though we had shadow there before, it's kind of gone a bit light, so I need to just touch that up a tad underneath there. You could come back in with a pencil or something later on and just sharpen up, you know, for instance, under here, the pencil, because it's much easier to get in there. So you could do this kind of thing. This is a black pencil. I know I said not to use black, but it's okay. Once you've got your blue violet in there and a little bit of warmth, then your black will be nice just to sharpen everything up and get those darks really dark. You know? So pastel pencils are your friend. If you don't have any yet, better start saving, because they're great for, you know, all the fine things and the small bits. Okay, so I've got that one and that one. A bit more pink in there. And I can come back and add some lights after. I just need to finish off these little shapes. So then we've got this one that comes here. Like that. And then there's a small one there. And then we've got those three little ones in the middle, which are literally just little shapes. And so there won't be a whole lot of blending on those guys because they're too hard to do at that size. So if you have blenders, that's awesome. You can use those. And if not, just sort of use the pastels to kind of blend themselves. So if you kind of get to a point where you don't need to get your fingers into it, you can just kind of lightly just push the colour around, especially in a small space like this. And you just push the colours around and they sort of blend together on their own anyway. And just notice where it's light and dark on each one of those little shapes. And so, you know, for your mid-tones, you could use your pinks and purples. And then for the lights, use your little grey or your green or whatever you've been using on the first layer that we've been putting down under each one. And so every colour is a tone. And, you know, if you imagine you're doing this in charcoal, so if you were just doing this in black and white, then what shade of grey would be purple, basically? Or, you know, what shade of grey would be the blue, for instance. So that would be a darker grey because it's a darker tone. So it's tricky to kind of get your head around it, but once you understand tone and how to convert tone into colour, it starts to all kind of make sense. I'm just going to dab these in lightly. So we can't blend too much because we're getting too small and your fingers are fatter than that for one. So now we've kind of filled in all those little middle ones, and now what I want to do is just try and get some of the shadow in there because it's looking a little bit same everywhere. So if I darken off in there, in that triangle with that part there, and then around this area here. So we just literally want to make some shadow and get this to look like it's in layers. And as I said before, if you then have a pencil, you can get in and do these final lines in between all the little tiny ones in the middle there. If you don't have a pencil, then charcoal may work. Let's see. Sometimes it should work, should be fine. Sometimes if you've got a lot of pastel down, the charcoal kind of won't stick, but I'm pressing pretty hard here and it's actually staying on. So charcoal is a good option if you don't have pencils, just to get those little bits of shadows in there. Okay, nearly there. Nearly there. This is good. So we can refine those lines a little bit more. What I want to do now, just before we finish up, because I've got a couple of minutes to go, I'm just going to tip off my dust again. And now what I want to do is just run around this thing with my eyes and figure out if it needs more light and or colour, or what does it need? Does it need something else? I feel like it needs a little bit more of a glow here and there, just to make those light bits pop. So I'm going to pick out a few little areas where I want to put white and just make that really bright so that it starts to kind of shine and pick up some of the light. So on this one here, this little triangle here, it's got more light across there. See, so it's kind of blended in with the colours underneath, so it's not super bright white. If you want it to stay really white, just leave it on the surface and don't push it in. Just let it sit there. Press hard, put it down, and then let it sit. So that's all a bit too much in there in the middle, but I feel like I want to get more white or bright just around some of these edges so that they shine a bit more. Just pick a few, don't do too many, because then, as I said earlier, you will, you know, it just saturates it and then nothing kind of stands out. So just pick a couple of spots where you can put some really bright white light. If you're not excited about white, then a very pale yellow, like a really, really light yellow, is beautiful too, because that's got more warmth than just white, and that will actually make things look like they've got sunshine on them. Okay, so I'm just going to run around there a little bit more with the white. And there's a nice little white line there too. So the best white to get for this kind of work, if you're doing it at the very end and you want it to sit on the surface of your painting, is a schminky. So the schminkies are really creamy pastels. And I always said, if you can't afford, you know, if you can only afford one, because they're about $9 each, get a white one, because it's just, you know, it sits on the surface beautifully and just glows. It's just lovely, nice way to finish off your painting. So just by adding those few little bits of white on some of the edges there, it's now starting to come alive and it's got a bit more pop. I feel like I could add more dark, but I really like adding extra darks and creating, you know, nice contrast. But we're out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'll finish up here, and you might have to come and do a little bit more work on this later on. So if you're watching this video, I hope you really enjoyed painting this succulent with me. I've never done a succulent before either, so we're all in this boat together and we're figuring it out as we go. So thanks for coming, and please share your paintings with me. I'd love to see your photos, see how you go, hear your feedback and what you thought, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks.